I can hear you. Okay. Regan, I have the PowerPoint on my iPad now, so you don't have to worry about anything like that. Yeah, it's just seeing. Yeah, okay. I know. That's fine.
Good evening, and welcome to the Gilroy Central School District Board of Education meeting. Today is Tuesday, February 14th. Would you all please silence your cell phones and stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first on the agenda tonight, we have public comment, and we have one person signed up, Sarah Kate Cantor. You can come right to the mic. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. On Wednesday, February 1st, I was thrilled to see that there was an article in the Times-Union titled, "Union College Considers Dropping Dutch Men, Dutch Women Nicknames." I am now going to read a few excerpts from this Times-Union article. This is what it said. Union announced Wednesday the school is looking into changing its nickname. Union said on its website it is seeking to build a stronger future while celebrating its illustrious history. In that spirit, the college is in the midst of a comprehensive branding update designed to strengthen how we communicate Union's distinctiveness and the power of a Union education to prospective and current students, faculty, staff, alumni, and the general public, the statement continued. Examining whether Dutch men/Dutch women best portrays the image Union wants to project to the world is a natural outgrowth of that work, Union said on its website. We are confident we will be successful in finding a nickname that better represents Union College. It's true that this part of New York is associated with Dutch heritage, but by no means is the region monolithic in regard to those who have settled here, the school said. In fact, the region is also the ancestral homeland of the Iroquois Confederacy, which is thought to date back to the 15th century, well before the first Dutch explorers arrived. Those are the excerpts from the article that I wanted to share with the board and the administration. When I read this article, I was excited to learn about the efforts that Union is making in regard to examining the power of words, specifically in this case, the power of names and nicknames. I applaud Union for beginning this process of change, and I hope that others in our area, including our own school district, will start to think about whether or not we want to continue to use words, specifically in our case nicknames, that uplift colonialism, the impacts of which are still felt today. I think one of the great things about this point in time is that we have access to so much important information regarding our historical past. We also have access to so much information regarding historical figures that we might be interested in uplifting and honoring instead. Taking our cue from Union, now is a great time to start a district-wide, respectful conversation, taking some time to reflect on and discuss who we uplift and honor and why. Thank you.
Ms. Cantor. Linda, do we have any other public comments? No? Okay, thank you. I know other people have mentioned the Dutchmen. Actually, not just the colonialism part, but the gender piece too. So I don't know if maybe, I know at the DEI committee, there's like a food for thought type of discussion page that maybe I could put that on there so we could start discussion, or if you guys have other ideas on how we want to just think about that.
I think it's a great idea to start the discussion.
Okay.
Has the board ever discussed it before?
Not since I've been on here.
Okay. No? No?
Not since
I'm surprised. Okay.
But I know that some similar discussions have been talked about at the DEI meeting, so it might make sense to bring it up there, especially since our more recent vote too with the calendar.
We discussed it in 1996 before Lady Dutch. It was just Dutchmen. So, I mean, I think this has been a sentiment for a while.
Great, so we'll continue that conversation. Thank you, Ms. Cantor. And next on the agenda, we have the budget development, and so I'll turn this over to Andrew. We'll put that on there.
All right, good evening. Today, I'm going to talk about two items that are going to shape our budget for next year. The first is where we are at in the state aid process, and then the second is our district-specific tax levy limit or tax cap. So to start out, the day after our last meeting on February 1st, Governor Hochul unveiled her executive budget proposal for the state's next fiscal year. In terms of education, there were three big things that I wanted to highlight. First, the governor committed to fulfilling the foundation aid phase-in. So under her proposal, next year would be the first year that every school district in the state receives its full foundation aid. This is a historic achievement, it's very noteworthy, and it's worth celebrating. Slightly troubling, though, within her foundation aid proposal, she calls out, or she proposes carving out some of that money for a specific use. Now, the general idea of foundation aid is that it's unrestricted money for local decisions, for school boards to decide how to best allocate funds within their district to achieve their mission, vision, and goals. What the governor is saying, yes, you have this foundation aid, but we want you to spend this much of it on what she's calling high-impact tutoring. And we don't fully know in her proposal what this would encompass, but we do know that it would be supplement, not supplant. In other words, it has to be new efforts for high-impact tutoring for students. And this $521,000 is our district-specific set-aside. And then the third part of her proposal is significantly expanding UPK funding. At the statewide level, we can see the notable increase in foundation aid encompassed by fulfilling the phase-in. One of the reasons that this amount is so large is that the foundation aid formula incorporates inflation, and inflation last year was quite high. We also see the second biggest jump, or third biggest jump, but of the meaningful jump, transportation aid is up $176 million. As we know at our district level experience, transportation costs are rapidly rising. And as transportation aid lags, so it's reimbursed for spending in the following year, my prediction is when we see next year's budget, we'll also see a similar jump in transportation aid because transportation costs keep rising across the state. And then we see a $160 million increase in UPK funding. Again, the way the state funds UPK is on a per slot basis. So each school district gets an assigned value of a slot and then gets funding for the number of slots it's allocated. If school districts can't, for a variety of reasons, accommodate those slots, they don't receive the funding. Now, turning to Guilderland specific state aid runs, our foundation aid increase is approximately $5 million. So we're going from 19.1 to 24.2 million dollars. Also a big jump in transportation aid. Again, as we are experiencing the cost of transportation, we would expect that. Overall, very, very large state aid increase. But I'm going to point out the bottom line. We are not spending the $966,000 we were allocated last year. We're functionally unable to accommodate that. And instead, they awarded us more than 90 additional slots of funding. This is not something that we are likely to be able to have the space or the partnerships to be able to realize. I want to put the phase-in, and especially next year's proposed increase, in the historical context. So this is foundation aid for Guilderland since the formula was first created. Guilderland has never received its full foundation amount, so we've always been on the phase-in. We've always been historically underfunded. So the idea of foundation aid is the state determines how much it costs to educate a student, how much of that money a district has the capacity to provide locally, and then how much additional costs there are for certain kinds of students, like students with disabilities, students in poverty, English language learners, and allocates additional money for those students. So foundation aid is an evidence-based formula. It's not an arbitrary model. So in the state's own approach, they have said they've not provided us the resources we need to educate our students. So one way of looking at this is not look at next year as a really, really high mark, but instead extend that backwards and look at each year as how far we've been underfunded. I say that as a thought exercise. It's very unlikely the state is going to look at it that way and say, here, let us give you all the money that we should have given you in the past. But I do think it's notable to look at, yes, we're getting a big increase, but this is what, again, in theory, we should have been receiving from the state for 15 years. Then moving into the other part, the other main part of our funding for our budget is the local levy. We are a district where the local levy makes up the majority of our overall budget. And for the last 10 years, levies in New York State have been subject to the property tax cap. This is a quasi-complicated formula that boils down to most expenses fall inside of regular operations. Those are subject to the 2% or inflation, whichever is lower, cap. And then there are certain expenses that can be excluded from that calculation that are then added on. That's what gives you your district-specific tax cap. This threshold is very important because it determines the kind of support we need from the community in order to adopt a budget. So if we are compliant with the tax cap, that is, if our levy increase, our levy total is at or below the cap, we need a simple majority, so 50% plus one vote. Whereas if we propose a levy that exceeds the tax cap, we need to receive 60% of support from the voters in order to pass a budget. If we don't, we then have a second chance to propose a budget. We can propose the same budget, we can modify it. If we're defeated for a second time, we are then forced to adopt a contingent budget, which is much more constrictive, including having a flat tax levy. So this is the calculation for our district for next year. We start with the levy we raised last year. Then there is a tax-based growth factor. This is determined by the state. It is saying this is how much the property in your district rose, like the value rose. If property values declined, it's held flat, so no one's tax base drops in the state formula, but ours grew very modestly. We then account for pilots, which are payments in lieu of taxes. These are agreements that development authorities can make with private companies in order to support economic development. We are all familiar with the concept of anything that reduces the taxes someone pays offsets the burden of carrying the levy onto others, so pilots carry the same function. When a pilot is in effect, an entity is paying less taxes than it otherwise would, so that's displacing the tax burden onto others. Capital expenditures net of state aid. This is the amount of money we spent last year on debt service and capital projects minus building aid we received in that year. So putting all of those together gives us the adjusted prior year tax levy. That is the starting point. We then apply, this is where the 2% comes in, multiply by 2%. We get our growth adjusted. We subtract pilots we're expected to receive this year. And then we move to the tax levy limit, and then we can look at what's excluded. So our capital expenditures net of state aid, this is again money we're spending on capital construction projects next year, minus the amount of building aid we're anticipating receiving next year. Putting all those together gives us our maximum allowable tax levy limit amount, which is 3.01%. Again, this is a preliminary calculation. Some pieces of this data can change, but by and large, this is the figure we are starting with. As I said, inflation's grown. This is something of an ugly map, or ugly chart. Because it shows that until the spike of inflation, the tax cap and inflation were fairly similar to one another. Again, this is district-specific tax caps, so this is for the state when the state as a whole does all those calculations I just showed, accounts for pilots, takes its building aid, capital spending, all of those things, and puts them into effect. Some years inflation's higher, some years the overall tax cap's higher, but they're not that significantly different. All of a sudden, inflation jumps to 8%, and here we are, 3.01%. I need to clarify, this is our tax cap. I was referring to a chart I made for something else and didn't use. Anyway, this is Gilliland's tax cap. So why does that matter? What are we doing with our budget? Inflation hits us in a couple of ways, some that are unique to public entities. Our biggest expense, salaries and benefits, those are determined in contracts, which will be affected by inflation. but not in the immediately. So 1 year of inflation we can sort of weather from that point of view. But we have capital projects ongoing, we have transportation costs. All of those are very vulnerable to inflation. So we are seeing the rise in expenses there. Ensuring the phase-in becomes law, number one priority. Concern about carve-outs to foundation aid because it's a slippery slope. It's important that we make UPK more accessible. We're going to give this funding, make sure districts are able to use it. There are other proposals that school supporters are advocating for, from meals to reporting changes, and then all of that will lead up to the state passing a budget in April. Before that, we will have our superintendent draft budget. Those two pieces will give us our preliminary plan for our budget, and then the state budget will give us the final numbers to work with on then developing a final budget. Thank you.
Does anyone else have questions? Oh, Rebecca? No, go ahead.
I was just wondering, in general, not specific to Guilderland, how does the state come up with the spots for pre-K?
It is a need-based formula with a floor. So we are at the floor, so it's about 5,500 a slot. 5,400 a slot. So that is the floor. Some districts receive more than that. I will say some districts are supplementing that with general fund money.
And can I ask a follow-up about that? How is the state giving any guidance about how to divide them between 4 and 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds?
These slots are full-day 4-year-olds.
Our slots are, but...
No, the slots that were funded. And
Okay.
all of the increases, the state's intention seems to be promoting full-day 4-year-old pre-K overwhelmingly
Okay.
as its first, in terms of allocating funding and increases in funding.
Okay. Thank you.
I don't know if it's Andrew or to Dr. Wiles, a follow-up about the UPK, because from the presentation, it makes it look like, oh, we have all this extra funding, but I know, I don't know if you can explain how it's not as simple as it looks, because there's not enough providers or capacity, right, in the area or the town?
I'll start, and if Rachel wants to jump in here. For us, we do not have any space within our schools in order to offer 4-year-old pre-K. All of our elementary buildings are essentially full capacity. So when this first came to us as a new funding stream now 3 years ago, the only option we had was to reach out to community partners to offer the program to, groups like Kids Corner and St. Madeline Sophie, who do have 4-year-old pre-K programs. So the mechanism that we have for offering this was to offer a request for proposals or an RFP to see who would like to partner with us in order to do that. In the first year of our funding, we actually had 2 entities who completed the RFP, so we were able to offer, I want to say it was about 40 slots, which was far less than the full funding that we have. In year 2, we reissued the RFP and we increased our partners to 4, and we have about 80, I think.
110.
Oh, 110, thank you, Rachel. And we seem to be maxed out at that because those entities don't have more capacity either. It's a function of space, staffing, mostly space and staffing. So unless there are new providers that arrive in Guilderland, we're kind of maxed out at that number. So there are some creative conversations that are happening regionally because for essentially all of the suburban schools, no one has space. So Niskayuna, Bethlehem, North Colony, we're all reaching out to partners and none of us are able to fully utilize the additional resources. So we have been having some preliminary conversations about trying to regionally offer a pre-K if there are buildings within the greater capital region that have space, Catholic schools that are no longer functioning or other buildings. Could we pool our resources and offer a more regional approach? And that is an idea that's in its infancy. Because we're already talking about registration for next year, starting in a couple weeks.
Hopefully in March.
So we're actually going to be another year out before that could even be possible. And it's even more complicated than that, but that's, space and programming are at a premium in our region.
Also, to follow up on that, you discussed with Seema and I Friday about some great advocacy around making it more equitable to get into the pre-K. It was a really great thought process behind making sure that people that really need pre-K have the availability of pre-K,
The lottery.
as opposed to the lottery that may not get selected one year, may not get selected another year, but can you explain a little bit around that conversation, because I thought it was really great.
Sure. So the UPK, the U in UPK is universal, which means that all 4-year-old children within your boundaries have an equal chance for getting one of these slots, which means that anyone who registers will have an equal chance in the lottery. The problem with that is that sometimes the children whose parents have the least means to pay for pre-K don't get selected in the lottery, and other families who would have sent their children regardless do get it. Not begrudging anyone the support, but we have many families whose children were not fortunate enough to be selected in the lottery. So one of the conversations we are having with our elected officials is to adjust the notion of the lottery to give preference to those who are struggling economically. We have not gotten progress there yet, but that is a notion that would potentially help students who need it most find that service.
It's an interesting concept to advocate for.
I have one more question. I guess for you, Dr. Wiles. Did you say that you'll have or that you asked the administrators in regards to the budget, like what their items are that they're interested in
Yes.
prioritizing?
Great question. So just today, I'm finalizing, helping with the district office team and the wider leadership team, 2 lists that I'll be sharing with the board at the end of the week. One is a list of the requests that we've received from across the district that we believe are best funded through our remaining federal dollars, in that they are maybe one-time requests, or they are programs and services that meet the parameters of our COVID funding. So if they fall in that category, we're going to suggest, while we have federal dollars available, we use them to that effect. That's list number 1. List number 2 are all of the other requests that could potentially be considered for the general operating budget. So the one that Andrew was talking about earlier, the one that goes to the voters in May. So there are several pages of requests with what the request is, the dollar amount, the number of FTEs, if applicable, that are associated with it, along with a brief rationale statement for why it's important for us to consider it. I'll share that, both of those lists with you on Friday or Thursday, depending on when we get them in good shape for you. That second list, which is the request for consideration under the operating budget, the general operating budget, are the things that we'll be working on next week during the break to hone down to say, based on the resources that we have available to us, here's what I would recommend in that March 7th presentation that we consider in the budget. And that will be kind of the starting salvo for what's in, what's out.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Other questions?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Wells. Thank you, Andrew. Next, we'll move on to the consent items. This includes the minutes of the January 31st meeting, the CPSE and CSE recommendations, personnel action, and the financials. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Nate, second Katie. Any questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Passes 9-0. Next, we'll move on to information items, curriculum and instruction. Rachel?
Good evening. This evening, I would like to recognize the math counts team from Farnsworth Middle School. Last weekend, they competed in the regional chapter competition held at GE, and they are now headed to the New York State competition on March 4th because they placed third in that competition. Two of our students, Jordan Baker and Dominique Zen, scored in the top 12, which earned them spots in the countdown round. The countdown round is an intense speed round, and both students did very well, with Jordan taking third place in that round. So congratulations to the entire team: Jordan Baker, Dominique Zen, Thomas Young, Roger Sheng, Brian Jiang, Hemsini Subrian, Mark Shao, Ben Zhu, Catherine Zhang, and Aria Ferguson.
Great, and looks like there's some pictures attached there.
Yes, there's some
Thank you.
pictures attached
Of the kids after the competition.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to superintendent information. Dr. Wiles?
All right, thanks so much. I have two items this evening, both good news items. First, the Guilderland Central School District has been recognized by the National Association of Music Merchants as one of the 738 school districts across the country with the honor of being one of the best communities for music education in the United States. In a letter congratulating the district on this notable distinction, Congressman Paul Tonko states, "The selection of the Guilderland Central School District is the result of tireless dedication and commitment in teaching future musicians, regardless of the obstacles that they have faced throughout the pandemic. Your hard work to keep music alive in the district is a testament to not only your students' musical excellence, but the hard work and dedication of educators, families, and the greater community." So we were appreciative of that lovely letter from Mr. Tonko, who I shared with Mr. Winans just yesterday. And while we're plugging the music program, the Young People's Concert is tomorrow. This is the concert where third graders from across our 5 buildings come up to the high school and hear a performance by our high school musicians where they're kind of introduced, not kind of, they are introduced to the various instruments in the band and orchestra, and I think they're doing Peter and the Wolf tomorrow. And it will be Kathleen Ellinger's last of these performances. So great testament to Kathleen, who's been a part of our program for years, and the next generation who are coming. My second item tonight is to recognize the girls indoor track and field who won the Division I sectional championship. This is the first time in school history. They wrapped up their victory on February 4th at Shenandoah High School. The team scored a total of 175 points, defeating second place Saratoga with 100 points and Shenandoah with 99 points, along with the rest of the Division I field. The Lady Dutch had a first place finisher in a total of 7 events. So congratulations to the athletes and coaches on their outstanding accomplishments this winter.
Great, thank you, Dr. Wiles. Next, we'll move on to board president information. The list of policies, A through V. Busy policy committee. I don't know if Nate want to speak to that and want to mention that we'll talk about the other policy that we haven't talked about yet at the board committee reports.
I mean, I think I'll save the board committee report just so they go. But yeah, these, and I just want to point out because there was one that came back up. I just want to make sure that everybody, it was the implementation of school-wide approaches. That was one that Kim pointed out a question on, and that we had that checked, and that one's being clarified in this draft. With the RTI, use of, RTI language, and that has been amended to match what we understand our policy or processes to be, excuse me.
Okay, so these will all go up for action next time. Okay, thank you. Next, we'll move on to action items and, oh, sorry, Rebecca,
I'm
go
so
ahead.
sorry. Can I just ask a quick question about one of them?
Yeah, of course.
Letter I, the use of timeout rooms, physical restraints, and aversives. What is the highlighting? Is that the area that's going to be updated, or?
Yes, those are the revisions to the policy.
Okay.
Those were, we certainly, as a committee, didn't make those changes given the importance of it, but those were recommended to us by,
Through the NISBA.
yes,
Okay.
NISBA changes.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, we'll move on to action items, and first, we have school business. Andy?
Thank you. Our first item is an emergency contract transportation with the Raja Group for transporting students who are currently in a district into the district.
Second, Rebecca, any questions or comments? All in favor? Aye. Passes 9-0.
My second item is Christine Lehman has donated a bass clarinet.
Can I have a motion to approve the donation of the bass clarinet? Nate, second Kelly. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Andy. Next, we have board president action. One item listed here. This is for the appointment of the impartial hearing officer. I can just read the resolution. It's resolved that the Board of Education of the Gildan Central School District approves the appointment of Robert H. Greenwood for a special education impartial hearing pursuant to the board's compensation policy and pursuant to the regulations of the Commissioner of New York State Education Department. Can I have a motion to approve the appointment? Judy, second. Kim? Any questions or comments? All in favor? Passes 9-0. Okay, next we'll move on to board committee reports. I'll start with audit.
We have not met. We do not have a pending meeting.
Okay, great. And next we'll go to business practices.
We have not met and we don't have a meeting scheduled.
Okay, thank you. Next, communications.
Can you hear me, Seema?
Yep, definitely can hear you.
Okay. Well, I tried to talk before and I didn't get a response, so I'm not sure. We will be meeting tomorrow at 4. And the only thing I was going to say before is there were a number of policies that may or may not, I don't know, overlap with the handbook that we developed. We might want to look at that so we're not just in conflict in any way.
Yeah, my suggestion would be that if our policies are in conflict with the handbook needs to be updated because those policies are reflective of, again, statute. Okay, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, I just think the language, we just making sure we're in agreement, that's all.
Yeah, that's good. That's fine.
Okay, great. Next, policy.
Yeah, so we had a meeting last week. Obviously, we had a number of policies that we looked at from NISBA changes and some old ones, the school interventions one. But a particular note, after some delay, we have started moving forward on the development of an racism policy. The first question being whether we really want to use that name, but we are developing it, and thankfully Matt Pinchinot, our Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, joined us at our last policy meeting to work with us in developing kind of the process that we're going to follow over the next several months in developing that policy, most notably getting the involvement of students, and we're going to do a thought exchange with students to kind of get a sense of what they want to see in that policy. And the general timeline that we developed is that by our next policy meeting, which is March 8th, we are going to have a rough draft for us to consider. At that meeting, this will just be committee meeting members at that point. We'll try to clean that up as best we can, and then that will be shared with the relevant stakeholders, most notably, obviously, students, to get their feedback, and then we will have a meeting set up. We've already set up a meeting for April 3rd. We will reconvene with some student reps and potentially other relevant stakeholders to, I guess, go on to a second, possibly third round of drafting that policy. Once we get that feedback from the students, we will, as a committee, take it back, clean it up even more. And then our hope is by end of April, early May, we will have a nice clean copy. We can look at it again, with the goal eventually, obviously, being to get a first round review. I can't remember what the process is. I don't want to call it a review or.
Up for information.
Up for information at the last meeting in May. I don't have the, for the board to consider in the last meeting in May, with an aim towards getting a full policy adoption prior to graduation. Is it ambitious? Maybe. I don't think so. I mean, I mean, just so everybody understands, I'm taking the initial swing at drafting our very rough draft. And I'd hate to put such a lofty goal on it, but my aim, and I believe the committee's aim, is to draft a policy that is certainly more comprehensive than I have found in the state of New York, and certainly probably the most comprehensive in the country is what I'm aiming for. This policy hopefully will touch on virtually every aspect of the district. And certainly, and I don't, we're going to leave this for board ideas and comments later, but we want to get the board's comments on what they'd like to see, areas that they'd like us to incorporate into that. And I have a list that I'll share at that point too. I don't want to share it right now of those areas that I've already started working on getting this policy to effect. Again, it's going to be very comprehensive. It is not going to be simply aspirational. It is going to have, for lack of a better term, teeth and guidance, and it'll be not just a policy, it will be a regulation within the district, and hopefully, I should say hopefully, I can't guarantee that, obviously. But we are certainly well aware of getting everybody involved who wants to be involved. Obviously, there's some difficulties in that. We want voices to be heard. That's why we are getting the students involved. That's why we're going to have a thought exchange. Obviously, if the community has thoughts, they know how to get a hold of us. That's clear. But again, this aim is to be a very comprehensive, far-reaching policy that will, again, touch every aspect of the district. And if anybody has any ideas about a name, that seems the most difficult part right now for us to find an appropriate name for the policy, but.
Yeah, go ahead, Blanca.
I was just going to add 2 points, or 3. One of the names we're considering is anti-race, or I'm sorry, anti-hate, anti-hate. Also, it would be a policy and a regulation, and which I think you mentioned. And then the other thing I was going to mention is that it is different, our hope is that it will be different than the anti-discrimination policy that we already have.
Yes, the district currently has an anti-discrimination policy, but that is really focused more on hiring practice. I mean, remember, it's our anti-discrimination policy is not what this policy is going to cover, although there'll be some anti-discrimination obviously in it. But
yeah, I think an important piece was that. Well, first, that we looked at one other suburban council school district that's in the area, and then we looked at, I don't remember what the other one was for.
Syracuse.
Oh, Syracuse, and they're pretty different, and they're not all the schools have policies, so that was one thing. And then I think it was really important that Mr. P was involved in going to have the students be involved, and because I think we've had discussions, at least in policy and at the board level too, about having students feel empowered and be part of the process in creating that policy, so they could have a voice there as well. Because I think a lot of those groups have been doing this work, before we have, so it would be great for them. I think we're planning, like Nate said, to have them come to one of the meetings.
Yeah, the April meeting.
Yeah, and then it might be helpful for if people on the board who want to have some input to probably, I know we'll have it up for information and then action, but to maybe share it sooner than later. We did have a discussion at the last meeting about, one of the policies had something in there about symbols or clothing, et cetera, those kinds of things, flags. And so, I don't know, we had a longer discussion about that, but I know that might lead to some further discussion, exploration about what's out there. So I guess if you're interested in that, like Nate said, to share that earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I will certainly have the rough draft that we will consider at our March meeting will be part of our agenda. So if anybody is interested in seeing what that, rough draft, looks like, they can certainly look there. I mean, my process is, this is going to be very broad, very wide, very lengthy. I think right now my draft is like 10 pages long. Single-spaced, so, and I still got areas that I need to get into it, so it's going to be extensive.
Okay, great. Oh, go ahead, Kelly.
Will there be an opportunity for parents or teachers or administrators to also provide some input? I know we focus a lot on the students, which is fantastic. Place to start, but there might be some opportunity there to...
I mean, again, certainly the drafts will be all part of our committee agendas, which are posted online prior to our meetings, and if anybody has comments, they know how to they can send us emails and show up for public comment and give us feedback. But I mean, I'll be very frank, I consider this to be a very important missing piece in our district, and although aspirational and getting it done, we will get it done before the June graduation.
Yeah, I'm not talking about like a conversation about whether we should have it or not.
No, I know.
Conversation about, I think,
Well,
parents could maybe communicate maybe their experiences that they've had with their children or other parents or whatever as well.
I think, I mean, I think they're always like welcome to share. The one point that Mr. P made was that I think a lot of the students who were involved in a lot of this work initially are seniors this year. And so it was kind of important. I can see it, being symbolic that we have this done by the time they graduate, which I think would be really nice. And of course, like, that doesn't mean that it can never be amended later. And we talked about culture always changing, et cetera. So it'll go in that cycle of policies that come up.
Yeah, the policy will include language about annual checkups, because obviously things change, our society changes constantly, and for policy of this nature, you just can't leave it stagnant. You can't let it sit for years. It's got to be examined and reevaluated on a annual or semi-annual or biannual basis.
Great. Oh, go ahead, Kim.
I was just thinking on the community aspect, we have our fireside chats for the DEI. That would be a good opportunity to
Yes.
bring that up and have people
That's a perfect
actually
idea.
come and do that.
Right, so that's a great idea. So if people want to, they could go to those meetings that Mr. P has. Thank you for reminding me. And if I remember, he has evening and daytime ones.
He
so-
switches it, yeah.
Tomorrow evening at 6:30
is first one.
It's online, right?
Nope, it's at the library. It's at the public library. Yes. Thank you, Nate. Any other comments or questions?
No, like I said, we'll open it when we get to the board ideas and discussion. We can have a bigger discussion about this, but for my committee report, that's my committee report.
Great, and then last but not least, DEI.
We haven't met since the last board meeting, and we're meeting again on February 28th.
Great, thank you, Rebecca. Next, we have public comment number 2. Linda, is anybody signed up? Nope, okay, thank you. And then lastly, board issues, ideas, and sharing. Does anybody have anything?
I mean, I'll open that if you want to.
I have something very small.
Okay.
I think that's going to be a bigger discussion.
Yeah,
So,
true.
maybe, I don't know. So I just wanted to tell everyone that New York State OCFS, the Office of Children and Family Services, is going to be launching new mandated reporter training for all mandated reporters tomorrow. So this is breaking child maltreatment news. A key focus of the new guidance is improved implicit bias training to prevent or reduce calls to the SCR, the statewide central register, based on race or poverty. In addition to that implicit bias reduction training, the update will also include revamped materials to better understand adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, and it will help mandated reporters identify when a family would be best supported by directing them to culturally responsive community-based programs through OCFS's new HEARS, HEARS family support line. HEARS stands for Help, Empower, Advocate, Reassure, and Support. And anyone can call this hotline Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4:30. This hotline can provide referrals to vital necessities like food, clothing, healthcare, and parenting education for when a family simply needs to be supported and not reported. And the reason I bring this up is because educational professionals make up the majority of mandated reporters in New York State. So I just wanted to share this breaking child maltreatment news.
Your name again?
So it's HEARS, HEARS, Help, Empower, Advocate, Reassure, and Support. And I have the hotline if you'd like it.
Sure.
888-554-3277. Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 4:30.
Thank you. That's great, Rebecca.
It's hard to believe it hasn't been in place already.
Yeah.
Well, remember, there was a discussion once about, like, what do we do when we know that the student might need some help and we're not really in a position to, we're not in like a position to reach out to them, but that seems like that's an anonymous.
It's anonymous and anyone can call. So a
That's
parent,
great.
A caregiver.
That's awesome. Thanks for the late breaking news. No problem. Nate, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, so I guess this is the time, I just guess circling back on the policy we're working on, is, we obviously want the board's feedback, community feedback, student feedback, community feedback, really, on what they'd like to see in the policy, what they hope to see in the policy. I will say this just to kind of answer some questions. I know again, the name anti-racism policy, I think, gives maybe a misunderstanding of what the scope of it. It is, as drafted, meant to address all forms of hate, not just anti-black, but Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, the list is long. So that's certainly, it's not going to be pigeonholed towards that. Some of the areas that I wrote down of where we're going to touch on in the regulations really is going to be leadership and administration, hiring and retention, curriculum and instruction, athletics, training and professional development, enforcement, reporting, investigations, and then monitoring, updating, and accountability, kind of going to that question about how it's not going to be a stagnant policy that's going to sit for years. It's going to be constantly evaluated and updated. That's the aim, at least. I keep saying as if it's going to happen, but that's the aim. So if there's any other areas that you'd like us to incorporate into our drafts, I'd like to hear them. If you can't think of them now, you know how to get a hold of me. But it's, again, my hope is that it will touch all aspects of the district, because it should.
Great, thank you. Kelly, did you have a follow-up question?
I'm assuming it's not going to be obviously just race. You're going to have LGBT, TQ, I forgot.
Yes, that was my list of hates.
Sorry,
that
I should probably know all the latest and greatest things, but yeah, right. So anti-hate is really, or anti-racism really is not like the word for it at all.
I think when you think of racism, a lot of people get an image in their head of what that is, but that's certainly not what this policy is going to be hopefully aimed at. It's going to be a far-reaching, broad-based anti-hate is probably the better term, but that's certainly how I'm, at least in my initial drafts, I've tried to make sure that it's very clear that it's not just anti-black, but Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-LGBTQ, all forms of hate.
Yeah. I think what's included in like a police anti-hate kicker, I guess you can call it, as far as like if you're gonna hate crimes, things like that, it should encompass all of those.
And Matt P did share with us some anti-hate literature that we'll certainly be incorporating into.
It's a broad spectrum, not just religion, race. It's really a huge
and I don't know what
spectrum of things.
Like I don't know what document you're referring to, Kelly, but I was thinking I guess the overall sentiment is to be more proactive as opposed to being responsive to something, waiting until something happens. So maybe that there is like a regulation piece to it, or there's an accountability piece, but also being more proactive.
Yeah, that's, I mean, as Nima referenced, the policies that, quite frankly, very limited amount of policies I've found in the state of New York are very, again, aspirational in sense of we don't want to be a district who hates. I mean, I think that's obviously very simple what they're trying to say, but that's what it is. This policy is meant to be more directive in terms of how we are going to incorporate these things into our hiring and retention policies, into our professional development directives, hiring and dealing with coaches and athletes and all of that. This is going to be, as the hope is that this will be a very more proactive policy than what, quite frankly, I've seen in most places.
And also, and this is just personally, like, I think it's great that the students are being involved, because I think they're the first to see where it's just performative and just kind of, a surface level versus like actionable items, or actually seeing things being, decisions being made at a district level. So I'm excited that students are involved, because they just put it out there really well.
Yeah, I mean, I said this kind of jokingly, but not jokingly at the committee meeting, is I recognize that I am not the person that should probably be writing this.
That's correct.
And just pointing that out, if anybody can't tell, I'm a white male, Anglo-Saxon, cisgender, so I'm not the right person to be doing this, but I am the person doing it, because we got to start somewhere. And that's why I'm being purposely very broad in how I write it. Because I want something we can start with and something we can work with, and that's why we're trying to get it to the students and get their feedback.
It sounds like a huge project for 3 months, and I think it's terrific, and I applaud you, and I hope we can get to where we want to be.
It's changing the system, which is pretty cool. That's the idea.
Yeah.
Are any other questions? Okay, I have two, questions or comments. One is, is it possible to follow up again about the food options thing and I know we talked about this I don't remember what meeting. Oh, no, but I brought it up at a September or October board meeting about having, one was a terrace kitchen option, but the other thing was also just to see what options there are in terms of different lunch availabilities for the different needs of our students. I know this is not like a small undertaking, but I'm just going to keep putting that out there, so it takes time. And we've had new people, so I know it'll take longer. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Just about that, Dr. Rivera, at our DEI communications meeting last week or the week before, we talked about having observances on the calendar.
Right.
And it would be really wonderful if our school lunch could sort of reflect some of that.
Oh, that would be cool.
On the weeks or whatever that those observances happen.
That's
Just
a great
something
idea.
to think about.
Oh, right, because someone brought up, the food calendar piece, or the school lunch calendar piece too.
Right.
So that would be great if, some of that reflected. That's a good idea. That was one thing, and then the other thing is, I don't know if we talked about it here, but we used to have the high school student rep that would come and talk at the beginning of the board meetings and share stuff. I know it stopped probably because of COVID. I'm assuming everything stopped because of COVID, but are we going to have that back? Do you know, or I don't know who helped facilitate that.
I can reach out to Mr. Piscatelli and
Okay.
get the ball rolling.
Okay, great. This is helpful. Any other board issues, ideas, and sharing? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Blanca.
I have a list of 5 items. One, do coaches, Marie, this is for you, do coaches that are not members of the staff already, do they receive any kind of DEI or anti-bullying training? How to deal with bullying that occurs on the team?
Regan, can I turn to you?
They all have DASA training,
Right.
but specific bullying training. They have hazing training, which is not necessarily bullying, but.
And then in the fall, we had the training that Matt did with the students, and coaches would have been a part of that.
Okay, so a parent was inquiring, and who should they speak with? I'm assuming it's Dave Austin if they have concerns about bullying. Okay,
Yes.
Dave Austin, got it. Also, do music students still receive a varsity letter? And is it chorus as well? Or do they receive any other type of distinction on their diploma or at graduation?
Don't know about a varsity letter, and
My husband claims that he received a varsity letter for participating in band, but
I'd have to look into
I can't confirm or deny that. I haven't seen the varsity letter. Okay, and so my point in bringing that up is that if we don't offer any kind of distinction, I think it would be great if we could consider researching one, exploring one.
Well, they do have the Tri-M Awards, which are a music award. And I'm not sure.
Does every student get that that's participated for 4 years or a certain number of
I
years?
can't remember the criteria.
It's just one heck of a commitment, and I feel like we should recognize it. And then the Pops concert, I want to congratulate everybody that participated in the Pops concert and thank our amazing staff. I do feel, as I've mentioned offline, that we were a bit cramped. And so I do think that we have grown past the East Gym and that we should only ever have it in the West Gym. I know that there was an athletic event, and I think that the Pops concert should be prioritized. That's my 2 cents. In terms, my last item is SRO funding. So on the Safety and Security Committee, when it was first brought to us, the offer on behalf of the town, I believe it was for a full year. And so since we're talking about the budget and we've only actually ended up using or taking up that offer for half a year, I wonder if perhaps there's a way to ask, if Marie could ask, if there's any way that we could at least squeeze out another half of a year in terms of thinking about the budget for next year. Just want to put that out there. Or even more, considering our tax tertiary situation.
Why not a whole year? I mean, like the
Another
next
whole
school
year would be amazing. Again, considering the tax tertiary situation, which we are stuck dealing with. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other board issues, ideas, comments, sharing? No? Okay.
Something came up with the PTA meeting, and I'm trying to, about this SRO, and I'm trying to remember something. Weren't we, have they had an SRO meeting of the subcommittee, SRO meeting since? They have brought it, so it was kind of brought up. We adopted it as a pilot program, but there hasn't been any more SRO meetings. Subcommittees of the. Did they, was there a purpose of having the SRO subcommittee of this thing, other than getting an SRO on ground, or were they going to be involved in some way? I'm trying to recall the conversation that I had at a meeting, a parent or a PTA meeting, but it wasn't very pointed or specific. It was just kind of like, oh, I wonder if they've had another meeting about this SRO and what they are discussing, and if they are having involvement in the furthering, like the program.
My recollection was the discussion was around whether or not we should add an additional SRO. So once, at least preliminarily, that has happened. I'm not sure that they have more agenda items, but the regular committee is coming up soon, the regular district safety committee. I can ask Tim Murphy to add to the agenda. Does the SRO subcommittee need to meet again?
I don't know if they had any things to discuss, or if there was anything that we wanted them to discuss. I think we talked about our DEI trainings, and I don't know what the process or where we are at with that, but I think that's maybe how it came up. I'm trying to think about that. It was a while ago. I didn't take notes, but that's all I had to say. Just curious if there was another meeting and if they had any other agenda items to discuss.
Seema, I'm sorry, I forgot one.
Oh, go ahead.
I've been writing them down so I don't forget. I participated in breakfast with the principal at FMS. Great job, Mike Lester. There was a sentiment among the parents. So Mike presented to us, he made us aware of an app, a whipping app that apparently has been used in a terrible way at the middle school where students, it makes a cracking, like a whip cracking noise, and students sort of pretend, or in some instances actually do, hit another student. So the reason he brought that up is to make us aware, but the sentiment is, as we parent our children at home, it would be great if somehow we could get the word out to parents so that this is on their radar, because not that many people were able to go to the breakfast with the principal. So things like what Rebecca brought up last time, you know, there's been an increase in vaping, or there's this app, please speak with your child about this app and let them know it's not acceptable, or things like that. So I was thinking maybe your email that goes out sometimes to parents, an update might be an opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, great. Any other board issues, ideas, and sharing? Okay, can we have a motion to adjourn? Nate, second Rebecca. All in favor? Aye. Passes 8-0? Did Gloria hang up?
She lost her internet.
Oh, okay. That's 8-0. Thank you, everybody.